Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is Trevor Blake, a self-made multimillionaire whose personal story and insights into the nature of success form the basis of his newly released book, 3 Simple Steps, A Map to Success in Business and Life. Trevor has an MBA from Durham University in the UK and was a graduate of Britannia Royal Naval College. He built 2 companies in the medical field, starting with a few $100s, and he sold them for over $100 million each. I urge you to listen carefully and read his book because it contains a wealth of practical wisdom that could change your life. Welcome, Trevor. I'm so pleased to have you on the show.
Thank you, Miriam. I appreciate the introduction.
Trevor, why did you write this book? It certainly wasn't for the money.
No, actually, all my profits go to cancer research and development because, I'm not a big fan of self-help books, and I wrote this book because I thought it was about time there was an authentic book out there written by somebody who had actually practiced what he preaches, and all I've had in my life is the 3 simple steps to give me a helping hand, if you like, and actually, what happened was I decided to retire after I sold my second company, and I've always heard of people doing sabbaticals and thought it was sort of a romantic notion. And so I told my wife I was going to retire, and she gave me one of those looks that only women can give. And then after pacing the kitchen floor for 2 weeks, she said if I didn't start something new, she was going to murder me. So she actually dispatched me to the airport to pick up a visitor, and I was looking through the bookstore in the baggage claim area, and there was a new book out by a new self-help guru, and on the front cover was, a full profile picture, and there was a stained glass window behind his head, and he was bathed in this heavenly light. And I picked it up, and there were all these quotes and information taken out of context, using religious text to try and make a modern point. And I thought, it has to stop. So I decided I'd write an authentic book, and so all my profits go to cancer research and development, just to round off that authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So there's basically nothing in it for me. So even if you don't like the book, at least you're doing something good.
Tell us who you wrote the book for. It certainly is not limited to up-and-coming young entrepreneurs. I have the feeling that you had in mind anybody from an empty nester, housewife, to anybody who's been laid off from their job, to really anyone at any age.
Yeah, it is fairly broad-based in terms of its audience, but I think all self-help books are. But for me, one of the demographics that's really overlooked in Western society is the stay-at-home parent or the empty nesters, if you like, because a generation ago, when the children left home, went to college or went to work, and you were probably in your late 40s, early 50s, it was considered countdown time to retirement and old age, and you weren't expected to go out and reinvent yourself. But we live in a different world now where you're actually expected to go out and get a job or go back to college or do something in those late years, those middle-aged years. And it's fairly scary for most people. I come across a lot of people who find themselves suffering the same symptoms almost as grief in a way, because the kids have left home and they have this empty feeling, and they're only 50, which today feels like 30 used to. Or so I kid myself. And you're required to do something with your life. But of course, when you had your kids 20 years ago, the internet hardly had existed. So you're in this really difficult technological age, and it can be very intimidating. So the book primarily was aimed to that audience, and obviously also the business audience, including the road warrior, because I'd been like that myself, running from airport to airport, convincing myself that what I was doing was important and making a difference. But I knew deep down it wasn't. And I know that feeling, and I meet a lot of people who have that feeling that they were meant to be more than they are. And the book is about how you can put the brakes on and reinvent yourself to be all you were meant to be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Of course, with the economic situation, a lot of people can't even afford to retire. So this is a very timely book indeed. I was deeply, deeply moved by the story of your amazing mother and the challenges of your childhood. They clearly had a major influence on forming your character. Tell us something of this background.
Well, everything I've ever achieved in life I put down to wisdom that was passed on to me by my mother. She had a very difficult life, and I was lucky in that I had a real life hero to take ideas from. I found myself in a situation where we were very poor. So my parents were evicted 3 times before I was 7. And the third time, this is in the days, 1968, when it was possible to put all of your belongings into the back of a truck and head off to the hills and hide from the creditors and the bailiffs. And that's basically what we did. And so at 8 years old, I found myself in this rural part of the world. It was like falling into the pages of the Chronicles of Narnia. So we left the inner city of Liverpool and ended up in the countryside, which must have been very hard for my parents, but for me it was just an exciting adventure. But the downside to that was that I found myself in a place where my accent identified me as foreign, or English, and we were in Wales, at a time when the Welsh were working very hard politically to get the English out of their country. and we were also very poor, so you can't hide that you're poor because, you have odd-fitting shoes and you're always wearing the same clothes. And so I became a target for the bullies and did everything that everyone does in those situations. I fought back sometimes and I ran away other times, but nothing seemed to stop the bullying, and it was fairly severe at one point. And so I just got out of everybody's way and I hid in the public library, the local town library. And that's where I discovered these fantastic stories of self-made men and women. I became addicted to autobiographies. And those were my historical heroes, and they kind of saved my life because I started to see these 3 common behaviors that have formed the 3 steps for the book, 3 Simple Steps, in all of these great lives. Madam C.J. Walker, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, they all did these 3 things. And I thought, well, if it works for them, it'll work for me. And I tried it, and I've had a great adventure ever since. But the lucky part of all that story is I also had a real life hero, because at the same time my mother was given 6 months to live. She had breast cancer. And I was there when she told the doctors, quite matter-of-factly, I'm sorry, that's not enough time. I'm not dying until my children have all grown up and left the nest. And I saw in her eyes what unshakable belief looks like, real time. And that has always inspired me. Whenever I face a challenge, I always have that image in my head. And it's, it's helped me through life. There's nothing that's impossible. And she was proof of that because, I then obviously I observed her for the next 14 years go through debilitating treatments and chronic pain without ever once complaining, and all the time making a difference to all the people who were around her. And she got to live out her dream. Her dream was to live long enough to see us all grow up. There were 3 children, and be safe and successful. And we all grew up, all got decent jobs, and we're all decent people.
Mm. You mentioned at the end of her story that at her funeral, more people came to her funeral than actually lived in the village.
Yeah, well, the village had 120 residents when we arrived there in 1968, and it had 4 chapels and 2 churches. It was that type of village. It was very, very, very lost in time. And they all so when we went to church on occasions, and the congregation was probably about 30. But when my mother died, there were up to 300 people at her funeral from all over not just from the village, obviously, but from all over the local villages and the towns, because she'd had such an influence on the people around her. My father couldn't really cope mentally with the fact that she might die at any moment and he'd be left bringing up 3 kids, and so he sort of tuned out of the world. He was unemployed my whole life, and we lived on welfare, and he would sit at home smoking cigarettes and reading books. And my mother went out to work despite having the cancer had metastasized and gone to her bones. So she walked with a walking stick that we carved for her from a branch of a tree ourselves, and the 3 kids walked with her. We go to school, and then she got a part-time job in a delicatessen in town. And in that position, I mean, she got that job not because she needed the money, we did need the money, but the money wasn't great, and not because she needed an outside interest or anything like that, but because at the end of the day, all the foods that had expired, which were normally thrown away, became our food, and that's how we survived, basically. That's why she got that job, and we knew that, and we all became part of it. But in that role in the shop, she influenced so many people from all different aspects of life who just fell in love with her because of the power of her spirit. And so when she died, there were literally about 300 people at the funeral, and I didn't know half of them. I'd never met half of them. And amongst them were John Lennon's first wife, Cynthia Lennon. She had been married, and her name was Cynthia Twist. And she built a folly on a hill overlooking the town. I didn't even know that my mother knew her, but it turned out at the funeral she told me that they were fast friends. All of her friends from Liverpool were there, and there were also a couple of actresses from a famous sitcom, a British sitcom at the time called The Liverbirds. I had no idea my mother knew these people. She never really let on, but they had all been greatly influenced by her in one way or another.
Interesting. Now, in your book, You have tried to distill the elements of your success into a formula that could be followed by others. And your 3 simple steps are indeed simple, but not easy. Where do you think the balance in this equation lies between your 3-step formula and personal character?
I think a bit more of a recipe in that these 3 steps are like ingredients that you throw into a bowl. And if you don't use ingredients in the right order, instead of getting a beautiful tasting cake, you end up with wallpaper paste. So you do have to follow the 3 steps. You can't just jump in at step 2 or step 3, and we can talk about why that is. But so step 1 is something, and these 3 steps are, like you say, they're simple, but they're not easy because they require a lifetime changing in habit, and it takes time to form a habit. So step 1 is about reclaiming mentality, which is about getting back to that pioneering spirit with which everyone's born, but the world kind of crushes because we live in a world where we're greatly influenced by everything that's outside of us, our family, our friends, the media that we allow into our brains. And, one of the things I noticed about those historical heroes like, Henry Ford and Andrew Carnegie is they had crazy ideas that, everybody else said they were crazy, but they didn't allow everybody else to influence them. They still forged forward to achieve what they believed in. And so I realized early on, it's impossible to become self-made if the decisions you make for yourself in your own life are based upon the opinions of other people. Mm-hmm. And those opinions can be well-meaning or malicious, but we tend to make decisions based upon what other people think of us. And that's why we get stuck. And so the purpose of the book is to release you from that sense of quicksand, as I call it, and to get control of your mentality so that now when you have those great ideas, even though everyone else will tell you it's crazy, your intuition is telling you that it's right for you. So the book aims to put the 3 steps together so that eventually you get to a point where you start to trust your intuition again. Because we live in a world where intuition is not valued. But I value it in my businesses. I've valued it equally as much as any technical skill. And all of the decisions I've made for my businesses have been based on intuition and not market research or advice from anybody who's working around those companies. They've been purely based on what I feel inside myself. And oftentimes everybody else has run to the hills because they're afraid that I'm making a crazy decision, but the decision's always turned out well. And so the book aims to get you to that point so that one day you have this great idea of going back to college or starting a company or whatever it is for you, and that idea can no longer be crushed because you're back in control of your mentality.